This may be the most insane out of a movie story you've ever heard. At least it was for me when I first heard how the saga unfolded. Maybe because my head can wrap around MI6 or some Western intelligence agency executing covert kidnap ops in Nigeria, but Nigerian intelligence doing the same in England was somewhat surprising. Imagine walking down the road in the middle of the day. Then a van pulls up and in a blink of an eye, your head is under a hood and you have been kidnapped. That was the fate of Umaru Dikko on this fateful Thursday on July 5th, 1984. Luckily for him, his private secretary, who they escaped Nigeria together to avoid arrest by General Buhari's military regime, happened to see him get kidnapped. And this led to a set of events out of a movie that became Nigeria's greatest diplomatic clusterfuck in history. I am surprised as much as I am sure you are too, but the Nigerian intelligence outfit indeed planned and executed a black ops mission to kidnap a wanted man in England to face justice. Although the Nigerian government countlessly denied having any part in the kidnapping of our former minister, however, government officials were arrested in the aftermath, and you won't believe who played a supporting role in the execution of these black ops: the Mossad. Allegedly, Israeli Mossad helped Nigeria. I used allegedly lightly because, as movies have taught us about black ops mission,
if any trouble does arise, you are on your own.
So, why did Israel get involved? Or, how was the kidnap planned and executed? Why did they have to kidnap him in the first place? I am sure those are some of the questions you are thinking of. So sit tight, because this is one hell of a ride as we tell the story of how the Nigerian military executed a kidnap in England. To do this, where else to begin than what sparked this wild turn of events? Alhaji Umaru Dikko was a lot of things to President Shehu Shagari. He was his brother-in-law, campaign manager, a vocal supporter, and a major player in Shagari's government. He was also the Minister for Transport and Aviation, plus the head of the Presidential Task Force on Rice. In case you didn't know, Shagari was Nigeria's first democratically elected president in 1979 after 13 long years of military rule. But Shagari's government, like many others, was insanely corrupt, and just like most regimes across Africa at the time, wasn't immune to being overthrown by the army boys. After 4 years of civilian rule, it all came crashing down. On December 31, 1983, which was also Dikko's birthday, a military coup led by Major General Muhammadu Buhari took over. Yeah, the same Buhari that ruled Nigeria as a democratic president from 2015 to 2023. 2 days into Buhari's military rule, he released a list of former government officials accused of corruption. Dikko's name was right at the top of the list for allegedly embezzling millions of dollars from Nigeria's oil revenue. While some former government officials were prevented from leaving the country and jailed, Dikko and a few others managed to flee to London. Dikko fled to London through Benin Republic along with his private secretary, Elizabeth Hayes. From there, they got to Togo and took a flight from Lomé. At this point, Umaru Dikko had become Nigeria's most wanted man. Every Nigerian government, whether military or civilian, had to deal with the UK government when it comes to extraditing key corrupt politicians who fled to the UK. Dikko was no exception. The Buhari-led government wanted to extradite Dikko and recover the stolen millions, allegedly stashed in foreign banks. But getting the UK to cooperate was painfully slow. The UK government reportedly refused to cooperate with Buhari. At some point, Prime Minister of Britain, Margaret Thatcher, threatened to publish the names and bank details of every Nigerian with a bank account in the UK. So Buhari's government backed off because that move would have exposed a ton of military officers, including some of his close buddies who had foreign bank accounts there. Who knows what Buhari was trying to cover up, especially for himself and his military officers' friends. Either way, the failed attempts to bring Dikko back legally led to a desperate and embarrassing move: the plot to kidnapping. It turned out to be one of Nigeria's biggest diplomatic blunders ever. So, here's what they decided to do. Since Prime Minister Thatcher has refused to play ball, the Nigerian government came up with a plan to involve Israel's National Intelligence Agency, Mossad, to help kidnap Dikko. You might think it was because Nigeria and Israel had strong diplomatic ties, but actually they didn't. They had no official relationship on that level, but still worked together in secret. Nigeria was supplying oil to Israel. In return, Israel was giving them weapons. Since many Nigerian ex-politicians had run off to London, they figured Dikko would be hiding there too. So Mossad agents teamed up with Nigerian security agents led by Nigerian intelligence officer and ex-army Major Mohammed Yusufu and headed to London. The kidnap squad included Yusufu, a supposed ex-Mossad agent named Alexander Barak, and another Israeli national, Felix Abitbol. They started searching West London, where many wealthy Nigerians in exile live. After days and weeks of searching, they hit a jackpot on June 30, 1984. Barak finally spotted Dikko in Queensway. He parked his car and followed him to his house on foot. From there, they set up surveillance on his house, watching his every move. For 2 days, the Nigerian team worked out the kidnapping plan, using their high commission in London as a base, while Mossad kept an eye on Dikko's house. They even brought in Dr. Lev Ari Shapiro, an Israeli anesthetist, consultant, and director of the intensive care unit at Har Sharon Hospital, now Rabin Medical Center, Israel. His job was to drug Dikko during the kidnap and keep him alive. On July 3, 1984, a Nigerian Airways Boeing 707 landed at the London's Stansted Airport. The aircraft came empty with heavy security, and the British authorities were told it was there to pick up a diplomatic package from the Nigerian embassy. The heavy security made the airport staff uneasy, so the airport authorities notified the special branch of Scotland Yard, the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police. Here's a very interesting fact. The pilot flying the plane was Captain Bob Hayes, who just happened to be the father of Dikko's secretary, Elizabeth Hayes. The pilots had no clue that the crates they were to pick up had people in them. The next day, on July 4, 1984, Dikko left his house in Bayswater to take a walk and was kidnapped by a Mossad agent. They threw him into a yellow van driven by Yusufu and then switched vehicles at a car park near London Zoo before heading to Stansted Airport. Okonede, a Nigerian diplomat and member of the Nigerian High Commission, was anxiously waiting at the airport for the crates to arrive. Luckily for Dikko, his secretary, Elizabeth Hayes, saw the kidnapping go down and quickly called the authorities.
911, what's your emergency?
Because Dikko was a high-profile figure as a former Nigerian minister, and of course a failed diplomatic negotiation had occurred for which he was the focal point, the alert was immediately escalated, even reaching the Foreign Office and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. An all-ports bulletin was sent to the airport authorities warning that a Nigerian had been kidnapped and might be smuggled out of the country. So the customs official began to keep a close watch on the sea and airports for the Nigerian-bound vessels. On July 5, 1984, 2 large crates were about to be shipped to Nigeria. By this point, Dikko had already been drugged by Shapiro, who put an endotracheal tube down his throat to make sure he didn't choke on his own vomit. Dikko, unconscious, was placed inside one of the crates, along with Shapiro, whose job was to keep him alive. The other crate had Mossad agents Alexander Barak and Felix Abitbol inside. These crates were 1.2 meters in height, 1.2 meters in depth, and 1.5 meters in width. Major Yusufu and Nigerian diplomat Okonede were overseeing the whole operation. They told the airport staff that they didn't want the crates to be manifested, meaning there wouldn't be any record of them going through customs. Customs officer Charles Morrow thought this was odd. When he asked about it, Edet showed his passport and claimed it was diplomatic cargo. Morrow had never dealt with diplomatic cargo before, so he decided to double-check the procedure. 2 things made the situation even more suspicious: a strong medical smell coming from one of the crates, and 2 Mercedes with Nigerian diplomatic plates parked nearby. Just at that moment, a colleague came back with news about the all-ports bulletin from Scotland Yard. This raised Morrow's suspicions even more. Despite Major Yusufu's protest that the crates had diplomatic immunity, Morrow was determined to investigate. However, because the crates were declared diplomatic, the Vienna Convention protected them, which meant customs officer couldn't just open them. Morrow stopped loading the crates, sensing something was off, and quietly called the Home Office and Prime Minister's office for further instructions. Meanwhile, Scotland Yard delayed the departure of the cargo aircraft. So, here's the thing. According to Article 27, Section 4 of the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, diplomatic cargo has to be marked as diplomatic bags and come with proper documentation along with an accredited courier. Even though the crates were declared diplomatic baggage and addressed to the Ministry of External Affairs in Lagos, the crates had no diplomatic markings. That was the first big slip-up by the Nigerian government. On top of that, the Nigerian diplomat didn't have the proper documentation, which would have ensured that the crates couldn't be opened or inspected. A final decision was made to open the crate in the presence of the Nigerian diplomat without violating the Vienna Convention. When they finally opened the crate, the Nigerian diplomat freaked out and started running. He ran for about 5 miles before realizing no one was actually chasing him and finally stopped. Inside the crate, they found Umaru Dikko unconscious, lying on his back without a shirt. Shapiro was right there beside him, keeping him alive with a heart monitor and a tube down his throat to keep his airways open. Dikko had no shoes on and his ankles were cuffed. Dikko was rushed to the hospital and gained consciousness 12 hours later. As for the Mossad agents in the second crate, Barak and Abitbol, they didn't seem the least bit sorry. They even called Dikko the biggest crook in the world. This whole scandal really took a toll on Nigeria's international reputation, making the country look reckless and lawless in its desperate attempts to catch fugitive officials. Both the Nigerian and Israeli government immediately denied any involvement in the kidnapping. In the end, 4 of the agents were put on trial and ended up with prison sentences ranging from 10 to 14 years because they couldn't convince the UK government that they were just mercenaries working for the Nigerian government. Alexander Barak got 14 years, Mohammed Yusufu got 12 years, while Felix Abitbol and Dr. Leviari Shapiro got 10 years. They all served between 6 and 8 years before being quietly deported back to their countries. The Nigerian government was furious about this act, and diplomatic ties between Nigeria and Britain were severed. In retaliation, the Nigerian government arrested 2 British engineers, accusing them of stealing a private jet and sentenced them to 14 years in prison. But the charges were later overturned and they were released after serving 25 months. To this day, both the Nigerian and Israeli governments still deny any connection to the whole incident. The British government, however, expelled 2 members of the Nigerian High Commission in London, including the High Commissioner. It took 2 years, until 1986, for diplomatic relations between Nigeria and Britain to be restored. After all this drama, the Nigerian government filed a formal extradition request for Dikko, but the British rejected the request. According to Buhari's government, this really affected their efforts to fight corruption linked to the Shagari administration, especially since the UK also refused to grant Buhari's request to extradite other politicians like Adisa Akinloye and Richard Akinjide for corruption charges. Dikko eventually returned to Nigeria in 1995 after being invited by General Sani Abacha, the very guy who was a member of the government that tried to kidnap him in 1984. Until he passed away, Dikko always denied corruption allegations made against him by Buhari's government.